Welcome to Grief is the New Normal. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, a licensed psychologist and grief specialist, here to help change the conversation about grief and build community and connection while we all adjust to this new normal we are living in. This podcast is for you if you are grieving or if you are supporting someone in a season of grief. I'm glad you're here. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to have today's guest joining us, Rebecca Soffer, the creator and founder of the Modern Loss book and community. Rebecca, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. I love what you're doing here.
Thank you. Do you mind sharing a bit about the Modern Loss community and just how you got involved in the work that you're doing?
Sure, as this is like my go-to origin story explanation, and I've repeated it so much that I feel like I should come up with a new story, but the reality is that this is how it germinated.
Yeah.
So I was always somebody who would have probably actively chosen to not have worked in grief and loss, but that's just not what the world had in store for me. When I was 30, my mom was killed in a car accident. And then 3 years later, my dad died from a heart attack. So, two dead parents at age 33, not the way that I thought life was going to go down, as most of us do not. When my mom died, I was a single New Yorker working in daily television with a very heavy schedule that didn't allow for a lot of leisure time or just self-care time. And I really was ejected into this world of trying to have to figure out how to navigate grief, loss without a roadmap, without an HR department, without a lot of friends, or even just more than one or two friends who I knew who had been going down this path for a while. And also build a life, work, thrive, meet people, date, go to Soul Cycle. That didn't really exist then, but it was just this weird space to live in where I suddenly found myself in this losing and building mode. And it was very foreign, very uncomfortable. I think it goes without saying that it was excruciating at times for anyone listening to this who's lived with loss or lives with loss. The bottom line is I just got really sick of it. So Modern Loss came out of all of that, which was something that I launched with my co-founder, Gabby Berkner, several years after my mom and my dad's deaths. We launched in November 2013 as a website, as an online publication offering essays that are narrowly focused around one aspect of the long arc of grief and loss, which means anything under the sun, as long as it happened against the backdrop of there was a loss here. At this point, 11 years later, I've written 2 books and I've had many partnerships, and I do speaking all around the world for companies and organizations. And the thing that I love the most is that it's become a global community of people who are pulling each other through the mess of it all. And the idea started when I just kept wishing that I had people around me who could show me instead of tell me that somehow it could be okay. Not tell me with their hand on my shoulder or just assure me that it would take a year. I got really sick of all the bullshit platitudes because they weren't coming true, It didn't take a year.
No.
And she wasn't in a better place. At least I had my dad, and then he died too. So I was like, there needs to be a different way to manage this. And at the time I was working in political satire, and I channel a lot of my hard feelings through comedy, through hanging on for dear life to the ludicrous and humorous aspects of it, because it kind of reminds me that I'm still in here during a time that feels really foreign. And so our tone is very conversational and let it all hang out. And we use a lot of dark humor, and we don't care. And if it's not for you, that's okay. We're not for everyone. But as it turns out, we're for many people.
Oh, you said so many important nuggets there, right? Creating things from loss, blending that personal with the professional, making a community of people that are saying the things you wish you would have heard when you were going through that grief. I relate to that so deeply. I mean, that's why I became a grief psychologist, is like the therapist had me watch VHS tapes in therapy instead of talking with me about my personal loss. So I was like, fuck this. And I went back to become a therapist.
Can I have that job so that I can just put on a tape for someone and then charge them? Oh my God, that must have been. And you must have just been, there must have been moments where you were like, okay, I guess I'll watch this tape because that's what I'm supposed to do, right? Because you have these moments when you're in these raw stages of grief where you'll do nearly anything that someone tells you to do if that person sounds like they know what they're talking about. And most of the time they don't, because only you know what you need, as long as it's not hurting yourself or anybody else. What you need from other people are ways to kind of plant seeds of what might be helpful because it was helpful for them, or what has been helpful in a clinical setting, that a therapist can share with you. Like, they know what they're talking about because they're grief informed and grief trained. But you learn more through talking about it and through experience than being talked at.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my brother died, and that's what propelled this whole life pivot. And there's just not a lot of resources on sibling loss. And I don't know if you knew this, but in a lot of grad programs for therapists, they don't do grief training. Despite it being such a universal lived experience, we are all going to go through it in some capacity. Clinicians aren't trained in how to do grief work beyond just a brief lecture on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages.
Yeah, it's really odd. And I think that both you and I know that those 5 stages were not meant for people who were surviving a loss, but rather were for dealing with their own mortality.
Absolutely.
So that makes me sad that there is still such a lack of grief training for actual therapists. I know for a fact that in, for example, medical school programs, that there is a huge lack of grief training and like how to speak to people with compassion. I did a really great partnership with this organization called the Seleni Institute, which focuses on perinatal mental health support. And they have this great online training program for clinicians about how to have difficult conversations with compassion. And it's just shocking that they need to have a program like that, because that should be like the I don't know, like
counseling skills 101.
Yeah, I'm just like, I'm so tripped up on my words because I just still can't believe that this stuff isn't like the bedrock of some of these trainings.
Absolutely. So Rebecca and I are meeting just after Mother's Day. There's so much complicated grief that could come around the holiday. How does that show up in your modern loss community? And what would you want listeners to know in this post-mother's loss space?
I think that what I've learned, first, I'm just somebody who has a dead mom and has for 18 years. And I actually just wrote a piece in Time magazine that came out on Mother's Day weekend.
Amazing.
And I was told it was one of their leading essays. And it was about the impact of absence plus time for me, and trying to show people why there needs to be sustained mental health support. Let's just say, specifically in this country with everything going on, instead of eradicating funding for it. And I tried to make the case for it by not only showing the reporting of all of this funding that's going away, but how 18 years on, what it feels like for me. Someone who doesn't necessarily describe themselves as a grieving woman, but rather someone who's living with loss, how it's just always there. And it has colored everything in my life. It has colored everything that I do. It has colored the way that my worldview has been shaped, how I parent, the risks I decide to take or not take through storytelling and what we do on modernloss.com, which is really sharing everybody else's personal experiences, showing through storytelling instead of telling what it feels like, not just in the early days, but 18 years later. My experience is that I think I remember writing that it's like my grief is no longer like walking in a constant storm, but it's more like humidity. Like it's always humid in my atmosphere. It's always there. It's always hanging around me. I always have to wipe the sweat from my brow. And 18, it's like a teenage adult, so it's like acting like an adult and super self-sufficient one day and then really needy and a pain in the ass the other day. And it's just something that gives me whiplash during a time where I would expect that I shouldn't have to deal with this whiplash any longer. So with our community for Mother's Day, the salient observation would be that Mother's Day is not just about people who have dead moms. Mother's Day is not just about people who have dead moms who had great relationships with them. We're all on Instagram. We're all saying this flower goes out to you if like you're estranged from your mom, if you never had kids, if you're mothering others. Yes,
Yeah.
we know loss is many things, and it is
Yeah.
not just death loss. Within the grief from death loss community, there are just people who are struggling with infertility. There are people who are struggling with partners who have died with whom they have children, or people who had role models or mother figures with whom they were as close, if not closer, than with their own mother. So Mother's Day can be any trigger for anybody. And that's why we pay such close attention to it, because it's a day that for me always feels shitty. I actually hate it. I do. I hate Mother's Day. You heard it here. It will never be what I want it to be. Even though I have kids who are, thank God, they're healthy and they're great and whatever, it's just never going to be what I want it to be.
Yeah.
We do a lot of talking around how do you make a plan, but also how do you give yourself permission to just boot the plan out the window if it doesn't feel like what you want to do the morning that you wake up? How do you give yourself permission to say no to things and maybe turn a no into another opportunity to connect with someone? Maybe you're not into doing something on that day or with your family, your extended family, but maybe you want to say, could we have dinner next week, or could we do something on Tuesday night? Like, how do you like stay connected with your support system while also feeling like you're setting down boundaries that are healthy for you? And now we're in Father's Day territory. So rinse and repeat. And there are a lot of people who struggle with Father's Day who feel marginalized by Mother's Day. They're like, do Father's Day now. Send me a newsletter, opt out for Father's Day. Of course, you have Siblings Day, which is in April, and full well that people who have had siblings who've died describe themselves as like the forgotten mourners. Sometimes they feel really overlooked. So my MO at Modern Loss, and just as a person who works in grief, is that you never know what someone's feeling.
Yeah.
It truly, not that it doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. If you miscarried, you had stillbirth, you had a kid get killed by a drunk driver, your husband dropped dead. Of course, all of that matters, but it's all grief and it's all worthy of respect and acknowledgement.
Yeah. It gets to take up space.
You get to take up space. You get to take up your damn space. There's enough space in the world to hold everybody's hard thing.
Yeah. So something you've alluded to here in your modern loss content, you talk about there's not one right way to grieve, right? So how do you help people give themselves permission to mourn in their own way, especially if their grief doesn't look like what we were taught to expect?
I think that just by being somebody who did not give herself permission for so long, I struggled for so many years. I struggled with how to figure out the right therapy for myself as a woman whose mother died in a violent car accident an hour after I said goodbye to her. And my dad was in the car as well and survived. So there was a lot of trauma that came out of that. I struggled with the guilt over what could I have done to prevent it. I struggled with the extreme stress and pressure of feeling like I had to be there for my dad, which was really hard because I lived in New York, worked in daily television. He lived in Philadelphia. And so I would just run myself ragged going back to Philly every single weekend and then going right back to work. And it was so much. It was so much for, a 30-year-old woman. Yes, that sounds like an adult. I get it. But you don't feel like one when you're in the thick of it. You feel like a tiny, scared little child. And so I think just through looking back of how hard I was on myself, not feeling like I was doing better on the 366th day after my mom died and then my dad died, feeling like I was doing a lot of the things that people told me I should be doing, but they didn't seem to be helping. So I felt like maybe I was doing grief wrong, like I was getting a D minus. And then feeling also very apologetic, like I had to expend all of my energy on pretending to be fine because the Rebecca that people knew was someone who was laughing a lot, making jokes a lot, literally worked in comedy, loved a good story. It's just like I was fun to be around. And it was really hard for me to get used to the new version of me the new color of me that really wasn't always fun to be around, that maybe really didn't want to talk sometimes, or just wanted to sit in silence and watch a TV show with somebody and not feel like pressure to share, or feel like I could call somebody at a moment's notice who was a really good friend, who didn't necessarily understand grief, but who I could feel comfortable just letting everything pour out to. And that was really hard for me because a lot of my friends didn't know how to do that for me. And it wasn't because they didn't want to. It's because we're just not a grief informed and grief normalized society. It's nobody's fault, except for the people who are trying to not promote the messages. And so I work really hard not to give people permission, because no one needs my freaking permission. People are always like, when is it okay to laugh? I'm like, I don't give a shit when you laugh. I laughed at my mom's funeral because I found myself replacing her lipstick because they used the wrong lipstick and it was absolutely fugly and it was literally orange. And I had to use her Clinique lipstick in my bag. And I was laughing because it felt so morbid. I couldn't believe I was doing it. And I was imagining her being like, Beck, oh my God, thank you. Don't want to look like this for all eternity, because the half-life on lipstick is probably very long. I didn't want the garish lipstick to be the last thing that was hanging on underground. And yeah, I don't care when you laugh. It's all normal. Grief is the abnormalities of grief that feel abnormal. For the most part, as you're the therapist, most of them are normal. Some of them are not, and you need extra help for that, right?
Yeah.
When we talk about prolonged grief disorder, which I hate that description.
Oh,
literally hate it, right?
It's 12 months. It's been 12 months.
Yeah,
And like,
I hate the description.
Pathologizing grief is
Pathologizing grief is a bad idea.
Yeah.
I think that the data is like that it affects maybe 10 to 12% of overall grievers, which basically means it's, for anyone listening, that if you're really having trouble with your daily life, your daily responsibilities, after a year's time, like you're really not able to do work, glean any remote enjoyment out of life, like participate in social life, etc. Like you're really like piecing out on, say, parenting and partnering and everything, like in a notable way, you might have what is called prolonged grief disorder, which is a valid thing because some people truly need extra support. They truly do. But most people don't. Most people are going to move through grief in a painful, ludicrous, insulting, but normal way.
Yeah.
And we just have to promote that message, get the right support, and also know that some of these things might be just for the short term. Like this may not be the deepest, darkest depths of what you're feeling on Tuesday, may not be what you're feeling next Tuesday or a year from Tuesday. Modern Loss exists as a community to supplement what people can get in therapy and from formalized communities. Let's say they're like part of a synagogue or a church. A lot of people aren't these days. A lot of people feel very lonely and like they don't have a village. Well, grief is meant to be communally supported. It's not meant to be an isolating experience. It's an individual experience. But when we don't allow people ongoing invitations to share or emote or whatever they need to do, then we're squishing them and we're marginalizing them and we're making them feel so unseen in their hard thing. And if you want to think about it in a purely selfish way, how can anybody be there for somebody else when they themselves are not feeling like their needs are being met and their hard things are being seen?
Again, so many powerful nuggets.
I have that extra coffee today, so I guess I'm feeling a little chatty.
No,
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. We're here for the spice. We're here for the chat. That community piece and the pathologizing piece, it's like grief doesn't go away. It just gets different. And we learn to carry it differently over time. And I think what's so hard being in this grief-phobic, grief-illiterate society is grief is painful. And we want boxes to check for there to be relief at the end, when really like there isn't this, oh, suddenly I've accepted and I'm at peace and everything feels all right within my system. It's like you said, it's like humidity, which is such a brilliant metaphor for you're just going to
I was happy with that one. I really only write. I'm a journalist by training. I have a master's in journalism from Columbia. So again, working in grief was not what I set out to do. I set out to be a producer for Stephen Colbert and then be like this I don't know, an extraordinarily successful creator of smart comedy, but it happened for a few years, but it didn't happen long term because I was drawn to this. And I think that there are lessons that you apply from doing what I was doing. First, from journalism, because you need to be factual. That's why I know that when we talk about prolonged grief disorder, I'm specific. But with the comedy and the satire, so many lessons can be applied to having conversations about hard things. And it's that you have to treat people with respect. When you're watching something like The Daily Show or John Oliver, I think that I'm being treated with respect because I'm being spoken to in a way that's very clever. So you have to assume that your viewer is smart enough to understand the twists and turns of what you're doing. I also appreciate that I can learn about really hard things or things that feel really boring or dry or scary because they're making it funny. They're inserting the right beats. They're doing it with warmth. They're taking a little segue when you need a mental break and you come back for more. They know how to pace it out.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I apply how I speak about grief. And it's not that it's always funny. It's not, but I always use levity and warmth whenever possible because people just need to feel like they're human. And when they laugh, they really are reminded that they're still in there. And it does crack them open that much more to the point where they are really primed to connect with somebody else and share their crazy story and then form a community because that's what it's all about.
Absolutely. You described that so well. I'm sure you're familiar with Strobe and Schutz's dual processing model of grief. And it's the oscillating kitchen fan, right? It's oscillating between grief work and restorative work. And how you described that, the narration of the story and being able to bring the smart comedy in with the depths of grief. It's that oscillation between the deep end of the ocean, the grief work, the feeling the sad, the active mourning, the talking, the connecting versus coming up for air, that balance between those two spaces. And that's the model of grief we want to use in moving towards integrating grief into our new normal.
Yeah. I mean, because how can you not? Because you can't just like barrel down all the time. Even write in my second book, it's called The Modern Loss Handbook, an interactive guide to moving through grief and building your resilience. I write that I have so much trouble with this metaphor that we have to like view hard things as a battle or like a war. Like they fought the battle, like you're going to fight this, like you're going to get through, you're so strong. Like we're all strong, we're all just human. And sometimes strength looks like just removing yourself from society for a few hours or a day so that you can recoup and get back out there. Even Steph Curry has to be, sorry, we're in the NBA playoffs right now. So even he, when he's injured, he can't play and he's their star player. He needs to get better so that he can become stronger again. And that is the same. We have to treat our grieving selves in the same ways that we would treat like pelvic dislocation or torn hamstring. We just have to because the truth is that the body and everything is intertwined anyway. Like the body does truly keep the score. Your body will tell you if you're not treating it well. And so we have to pay attention to this. And part of paying attention to it is not viewing it as a Desert Storm military operation. I actually use the metaphor, think of yourself like a crab, which is weird, gross. Okay, crabs actually are fascinating and they are the wonkiest animals on earth. They look so weird when they're getting their shit done. But, you know, for example, in the ocean, their only job is to hang tight while everything swirls around them. Like they just hang tight. They're just hanging on for dear life. And sometimes that's what it feels like in grief. And on the sand, you've seen those sand crabs on the beach. They scurry forward, backward. They move diagonally. They move side to side. And they just pivot when they see something that's not working for them. They come up against a robot. They're like, okay, what's going to work better? Do I have to move to the side? Great, I'll do that. Do I look weird? Absolutely. I am a creepy looking thing. Who gives a shit? Look weird. That's cool. But be the crab. Don't be like the military general because you're going to just storm yourself right into burnout.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Because you're the floating and hanging in the ocean. It's when you're riding the wave, that grief burst comes in, that tsunami sneak attacks you. I have to just ride and I have my resources that help me feel grounded and stable. But for the most part, I can't fight the grief wave. It's going to do what it's going to do.
It's too hard. It's more energy to fight it than it is to just move through it. And I always use this example, always, because it's my favorite kids book. And I have a lot of them, but I just read this to my 8-year-old last night because I selfishly read it at least once a week at bedtime, which is We're Going on a Bear Hunt. Most
Oh.
kids' books are just smart life lessons for humans, but it's We're going on a bear hunt. We're going to catch a big one. It's a beautiful day. We're not scared. Oh, mud. Thick, squishy mud. We can't go over it. We can't go under it. Oh, no. We've got to go through it. And so there's all these examples of all the things we have to do going on a bear hunt. And it's like really uncomfortable. It's not what we want to do. It's not what we thought the day would look like. It's what the day served us. And we have to move through it because if what are you going to do? Like stuck in the mud or not move through it and stay at square one? You don't want that. Moving through some of this is uncomfortable and it's painful. It hurts, but there's no other way. And
Yeah.
the only way that I know is to pull people in with you, people who are willing to be in the mud with you, even for an hour, even for a text. Build a community of people who ideally both have pre-existed in your life and those who don't yet. Build your team. Get the right therapist. Get the right
Grief coach.
acupuncturist or take up the right hobby. Grief coaching is great. I think grief coaching is awesome because it's not therapy. It's really someone to help you organize like where you're at and what might help you to do, like from logistically to like finding the right support. Just do it. And on the days when you can't, then don't. But don't just never do it.
Absolutely. And you have this idea of going micro, so taking small, manageable steps through grief. Can you share more about how this approach helped you personally and how others can use it when grief feels too big?
Yeah, I think that I'm somebody who does tend to get quite overwhelmed when things are swirling. I very much identified with the anxiety character in Inside Out 2. I was like, I know her. I know you. You are me. I am you. For those moments where just everything hits you at once and you're like, I can't see past it. Logically know that there's something beyond this moment, but I can't feel it. And so I'm going to get stuck here for a little bit. So my coping mechanism is, that's just my little phrase, going micro. Use whatever you want. But it's when I'm like, oh my God, but 6 months from now, yada, yada, yada. And I'm like, wait, but it's May 14th. It's not the fall. What am I going to do to just anchor myself in today? How do I get through the hour? If I need to, like, how do I get through the next hour? How do I compartmentalize? How do I use like different containment methods to like literally mentally put certain things in an actual lockbox to attend to either in an hour or later today or tomorrow or next week? Like, how do I do that? Because sometimes, let's be honest, a lot of us are working, a lot of us are parenting and partnering and friending and just being in the worlding, right? Have to get through an interview. That's just the reality of the world. How do we learn coping mechanisms that are both for short-term needs and for longer term? But the going micro is like, what can I use from mindfulness techniques, which here's a couple ones I love, which in the pinch, honestly, I truly love just putting my feet on the floor and my hands on the table. It sounds so silly, but it truly yanks me back to the minute, to the moment, to the second. I'm like, oh, I'm here. Okay. And I breathe. I close my eyes and I breathe. And if I'm sitting in front of someone, then I don't close my eyes because it could look a little weird, but I breathe. And nobody knows that you're putting your feet on the floor on purpose because most people sit with their feet on the floor. Or I remind myself that I'm safe, or I remind myself that if I'm worried about somebody, that person is safe right now. The going micro is really about, I guess, really technically mindfulness and figuring out the tricks to anchor myself in the right now, because I cannot take on the worries of what's going to happen in my lifetime. I just can't do that in one calendar day. It's not feasible.
It's too much. Absolutely.
It helps. It's a very helpful technique. And I remind people about it on trigger days like Mother's Day, on birthdays, death anniversaries. Like, people get overwhelmed, especially with Mother's Day, because it's like a 3-month-long marketing blitz, so it's really like a season. It's insulting. But I remind people, like, you don't know what you're going to feel like on the actual day. It could be fine. Yes, technically hate Mother's Day, but that doesn't mean that every Mother's Day I'm like in a corner dysfunctional. It just means that I really just don't enjoy the pressure of Mother's Day. I just want it to be like a nice day and just get along. We can just be fine. But yeah, I tell people like, you're worried about this birthday, this moment that's coming up, and your body knows. I get it. Like your body is, that your awareness is heightened, your sleep might be off, and that is totally normal. We are so attuned to that stuff. But when you think about the day, it's like, it's going to come anyway. So maybe do your best to not wrap yourself up in the anxiety of that day,
Yeah,
because that day
absolutely.
may not be as apocalyptic as you think it will be. Or maybe it'll be worse than you thought it would be. You don't know, but you don't deserve to torture yourself over it.
Yeah, I often talk with clients that power of orienting, like feeling your feet in your shoes. And I love what you said. Don't worry about tomorrow, worry about today. We often brace for impact, right? We know that
Yes,
date is looming. And so it's like we're hands on the steering wheel. I know it's coming and I'm going to tense everything. And that's where creating those coping ahead plans to build up to the day and a care plan for the day of, and then the aftercare plan, because maybe you did brace for impact and all of the feelings that you were holding at bay, everything that is going on in your body, it's going to hit you like a tidal wave the day after, because I made it through the day, and you release everything, you relax, and then suddenly whoosh, it knocked all the things you were holding at bay, knock you out. So I think that's so important to remember, to just orient to the moment.
totally. You said something really smart. Exactly. It's like you can't afford to just like blow your wad on all of the emotional angst that you're feeling. Like you have to pace yourself, right? If the day comes and you've been bracing yourself for impact such that you have nothing left, you're not
Right.
doing yourself any favors.
Right.
Exactly.
With your two books, the Modern Loss book and the Modern Loss Handbook, you have lots of personal stories and interactive support. What was it like writing these books while still carrying your own grief? And what do you hope readers take away from these tools?
So the first book is called Modern Loss: Candid Conversation About Grief, Beginner's Welcome. And that was a really interesting experience. I loved it so much because it was a real communal experience. I co-authored it with my co-founder in Modern Loss, Gabby Berkner, and then we commissioned more than 40 essays by a variety of people. And then we wrote extensively for it because we wanted to show like this broad spectrum of the grief experience, not just like types of people. We have a woman, Jacqueline Murakatete, and she wrote about surviving genocide and having half of her family killed. We have a piece by Kim Goldman, whose brother Ron, was allegedly murdered by O.J. Simpson. He was convicted of that. And she talks about what it's like to survive the murder of a brother and then in a sensationalized celebrity case. So we have so many different perspectives in that book. And that was such an incredible experience because I got to make these wonderful connections with a diverse range of people all over the world. It just felt like a communal thing. Like we really were moving through experience and stories of grief in the way in which modern loss is meant to exist, which is as a community. My second book, which is the Modern Loss Handbook, I wrote that all by myself. And I wrote it in the depths of the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. It came out in spring of 2022. And I'm super proud of it. It's in a third printing and it got a lot of publicity. It's in multiple languages. And that book is really, it's got 3 goals, which is to help people stay connected to their person or pet, stay connected to themselves, and stay connected to the world around them in the long wake of a loss. And how do you do that? Through so many ways to create ritual and memory and remember, and even try and remember the things that you may not actually want to remember, but I argue are as important, if not more important, maybe to work through. That did they like cilantro? Because you deserve to contend with some of the difficult things, and some of the problems that we have as people who are surviving a loss are that we don't get to talk to those people anymore about the strings that were left untied. That's not how relationships normally end. So we're left with, how do we deal with those conversations that we never had or were never resolved, or the hurts or the resentments? There's normally some work to be done, by us
Yeah.
in the wake of a loss that can take years. And I also argue that if you're picking up this book or you're starting your own grief work years later, that's okay too. There's no limit on this. As long as you're alive, there's no limit, because grief and loss sits with you because you're a living being. Grief and loss shifts, it evolves with you. So the second part of staying connected with yourself is like, how do you use, yes, like different therapeutic techniques? What are different therapeutic techniques? What are different kind of DIY things? Like, how do you create your own rituals? How do you harness music and art? How do you care for your sleep and rest? How do you do all of that? And then the third part is, how do you commune with the world? How do you still have a role at work? How do you show up and not get fired, ruin your career? How do you still be a friend while drawing boundaries? How do you come up with things to say in response to the idiotic comments that people will say to you, while maybe not being an asshole to them in response, but making it clear that what they said wasn't helpful
Yeah.
and maybe they could try again the next time in a better way? Because you deserve for people to know how to talk to you. They just don't always know how to. And I do argue for giving people a chance, not just immediately cutting someone off because they tried and fell flat, not immediately like shunning your friend because they forgot a big day or because people have their own reasons. It's mostly about them, why they don't show up for you. And I think that what you need is people to show up for you. And so give them a chance to
Mm.
by telling them what would be helpful. It's not fair for people who are going through the hard thing to have to be the teachers, but it's the reality.
Yeah.
We're trying to do our job, you, me, a lot of people, in informing the general public about how they could be helpful. But if it's like a one-on-one exchange, yeah, your colleague isn't going to know that when they said, at least you can get pregnant again, that was literally the worst thing that you could hear, especially right before a 2 p.m. presentation. But they will know if you say in a respectful way, yeah, don't be a jerk about it. Say, look, I know that you were trying to be helpful when you said this thing to me. I appreciate it. I really do, because it helps for me to have people try and support me. But when you said I can always get pregnant again, like, A, I may not be able to, who knows? B, I know I can, but right now I'm like really hurting about this thing.
Yeah.
And so that's just how it hit me. And like, just there are ways to say it. And I think that we do have a responsibility as grievers to help move the needle on how our society approaches these topics. We don't have a responsibility to run an Ironman or start a grief project. We don't, nope, that's not your job. If you want to, that's great. But we do have a responsibility to try, even with a couple people around us, to share what would be helpful to us so that we can get it.
Yeah.
And if people aren't amenable to hearing that, or they make it clear that they're not emotionally capable or interested, then you move on, but just try.
Yeah.
And then the disclaimer is, if there are people around you who are truly making you feel terrible and you get the gut sense that they're really not out to help you, then don't try with them. You're smart. Like, your spidey senses are still on, even as a griever.
Absolutely. So, Rebecca, this has been such an amazing conversation. As we start to wrap up, what would you say are 2 or 3 takeaways that you really want listeners to walk away from this conversation with?
2 or 3 takeaways. First, I think embrace the moments of levity and silliness and dark humor and joy that come your way at any point. I like to think that it gets easier to do so as time goes on. For some people, it doesn't get as easy as quickly. Everybody goes on their own path, their own timeline. But these moments of joy, I think a lot of people have this knee-jerk reaction where they're like, oh my God, I feel so guilty. My mom's birthday wasn't the worst day. Like, I actually had a fine day. Like, I had a fun date, or I was with my kids, or I got a pedicure, or whatever. I was like, fine, I didn't torture myself. I feel so guilty. No, don't feel guilty. Just like, and don't not feel guilty for your mom or the memory of that person. You deserve to be alive in the world and have a meaningful and rich life and not feel terrible every second of the day. When you find yourself laughing over something and then feeling guilty, maybe this means that I don't miss them so much or I'm over my grief or whatever. No, laugh, sink into it, seek it out when you need it, because you're still going to feel like crap. Don't worry. You will still feel like that. So then balance it out, as you and I were talking about. You can't always brace for impact. You cannot draw from an empty. You got to fill that well with meaningful experiences, with friends, hopefully with family, with levity, with leisure, with meaning, with anything that fills your cup. I would say that that's a really important part of grief. Joy and humor and laughter are so tied to the grief experience and the loss experience. And frequently, they will be the conduit to you forming community and deep ties with somebody else.
I love that. Thank you. So do you have any upcoming projects that you want to talk about, or if people are interested in connecting with you, what's the
Sure.
best way for them to do that?
I have 2 books out. The current newer one is called The Modern Loss Handbook, an interactive guide to moving through grief and building your resilience. I'm super proud of it. It's the book that I really do wish that somebody would have handed to me after my mom died and then after my dad died. I think it's very user-friendly. It's meant to be used in any which order. You can throw it across the room for months. I don't care. I won't be there. I don't take offense to it. And it really is meant to be just a friend in between 2 covers. I welcome everybody to check out modernloss.com, which is the online magazine. There are thousands of pieces on there. They're all free to access. There are these beautiful personal essays and then resource pieces with experts, how-tos, etc. And especially would invite people to start subscribing to the Modern Loss Substack, which I love doing. I send out an issue no more than once a week. I am very careful with inboxes, but we do a lot of Substack lives with experts and thinkers and people doing cool things around loss and resilience and mental health and grief and comedy, etc. I write a lot for it. I share a lot of projects that I think are really helpful for people. And it is a bestseller on Substack, and I really do love it. It's a very meaningful space for me. All of this work does not come easy. It's a lot of time and effort. And so if you think that there is space in the world for elevating these topics in national and international discourse, especially at this moment in time, I encourage you to become a paid subscriber because it does help support my work. That is what helps me continue to do this.
Amazing. Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for taking the time. This has been such a meaningful conversation, and I just feel so privileged I got to have this chat with you today.
Thank you. I feel the same exact way. Thank you so much for inviting me.
My pleasure. Listeners, remember to be kind to yourself today, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
That's it for today's episode of Grief is the New Normal. If this conversation resonated with you or you think it might benefit someone else, please share it. Sharing can open doors to healing, understanding, and normalizing these griefy conversations. If you're craving deeper insights or ongoing support, consider signing up for the Grief Gap newsletter. It's packed with resources, tips, and personal stories to help you navigate your grief journey. Visit the website www.griefisthenewnormal.com to subscribe. For those who prefer a more personal touch to their healing process, check out my grief journal, Authentically Unapologetic. It's designed to help you explore your grief on your own terms, with prompts and exercises that encourage reflection and growth. I'm Dr. Heather Taylor, and I look forward to our next meaningful conversation. Our soothing tunes are provided by the Datacorns. If you're interested in sharing your story, collaborating, or learning more, please email me at hello@griefisthenewnormal.com. You can also stream the episodes on YouTube for more engaging content. Until next time, keep exploring your grief with intention and support, remembering you don't have to do this alone.